And in the Bay of Bengal, what we have seen here is insecurity of one nation or some nations leading to the insecurity of other nation. I think that should be avoided as a combined BIMSTEC region. And however, having said all this, I think still the BIMSTEC region is one of the most peaceful, one of the most stable maritime regions in the world. There are no maritime disputes in the region, and the rule-based maritime order is upheld. Freedom of maritime commerce and maritime trade is continuing. So generally, the Bay of Bengal region is peaceful. So in that context, should we really talk about maritime security? And I believe, yes, we should, because before it comes to a situation where we have to take reactive policies, it is better to be taking proactive policies to and talk about a maritime order in the Bay of Bengal. In that, I would suggest that we take care of our own region and we design the narrative. So what is the basic need in the Bay of Bengal? We all agree that we need a rule-based maritime order. Number one, freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight, freedom of maritime commerce and economic prosperity. We are not the richest region in the world. We need to develop. But we don't want to be dominated by a single hegemonic power or number of hegemonic powers. And the territorial integrity or the sovereignty should be respected. We heard in the morning also how little we are integrated in maritime trade. Only less than 5% of our combined GDP we are linked. So in that sense, we are not really economically linked, but we used to be a very connected region before the arrival of the colonial masters to this region. And blue economy, few words about it, because the land resources are depleting, populations are increasing, the humankind has no choice but to look for resources from the ocean. And there will be many more industries in the ocean, many more players in the ocean, and therefore the need for maritime security and above all the need for maritime governance. So in this backdrop or in this background, what capacity should we be building? What capacity are we talking about? And I'm not going to talk about the hardware capacity, but if I share with you, the International Maritime Organization reported 57% of the world merchant world merchant shipping are not reporting their position accurately. And also, they are not operating the automatic identification system all the time. And the United Nations came out with a figure saying 40% of the fishing taking place in the Indian Ocean are illegal. And we also have the Mumbai attack, the Sri Lankan, the LTTE dominating the ocean, and also we have the piracy, which actually took the entire world shipping in by surprise. Now, all these are indications that we are maritime blind. As individual nations, we are maritime blind, or we were maritime blind, or as a region, we have been maritime blind. These people were non-state actors. They were not even states, but they were able to exploit the waters that we live in with freedom that even the states cannot enjoy. So therefore, I would argue the most important capacity that we need to develop is to develop the overcome the maritime blindness. Now, when you say developing capacity, there are some questions or there are some areas that we have to focus. The first one is the guns versus butter. Do we have enough money to buy all the modern platforms, maintain them, deploy them at sea? And shouldn't we be focusing more on developing our countries? Now, Sri Lanka has gone through a terrible 3-decade Cold War, and we know how much money we spend on regaining the control at sea, which otherwise could have been used to develop our country. That was a very high price we paid. And right now, in the Bay of Bengal, we heard about the two Cold Wars in the morning. And I would add another Cold War to that. I would suggest that there is a maritime Cold War brewing up in the Bay of Bengal, of course, the whole of Indian Ocean, and there is some unofficial maritime Cold War also brewing up in the Bay of Bengal, which has given rise to increased militarization or the navalization of the Indian Ocean. If I share with you some figures, from 2009 to 2018 September, 440 warships have visited Colombo, Port of Colombo. 440 warships, which is good business for us. We provide provisions. They come and have a drink. That's great. We earn money, but that means large number of warships are available or present in the Indian Ocean. These 440 warships belong to 28 different nations. Yearly average of warships coming to Colombo in 2008 and before was around 20. Now that average has gone to 65 per year. So that means there are large number of warships present in the Indian Ocean. Another problem we have is we don't have a clear maritime strategy. We have some individual strategies, but as a region, we don't have a maritime strategy. And I think it's high time the BIMSTEC, we think of a common maritime strategy for us to be acting in a more collaborative manner than what we are doing before. Now, Sagar was mentioned by Admiral Shekhar Singha. Do we really talk about Sagar? We hear quite a lot of, or most of the time we talk about Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific policy. Quite often we hear about USA's pivot to Asia or Indo-Pacific strategy. But our own initiative, Sagar, we don't talk much. And I would like to propose as a way forward, we have to use Sagar as a platform to move forward in the Bay of Bengal region. And in that, I think the BIMSTEC can play a major role in the Sagar, although Sagar is, we heard, is for the general Indian Ocean. Now, in the Indian Ocean and in the Bay of Bengal, we see that there is a power transition taking place. Are we ready for this power transition? How do we handle this power transition? Are we going to counter China? Are we going to work with China? Are we going to engage with China? That is a question begging answer. And we do hear that a lot of things are happening even between Japan and China, and India and China. We hear about Wuhan spirit, we hear about Shanghai spirit, and we hear that by 2020, trade between China and India would be 100 billion US dollars. I think that's one way to look at it. Rather than trying to get China out, keep them engaged, keep them work. Because when you talk with Chinese counterparts, they say we want comprehensive, collaborative, complete and sustainable security. So in that sense, if we have some kind of a mechanism, they will have to be part of it. In this scenario, I like to mention that in 1971, Sri Lanka proposed through the United Nations that the Indian Ocean be made a zone of peace. And at that time, we were worried about militarization, freedom of navigation, overflying, and trade. And unfortunately, nearly 45 years down the line, we are hoping for the same thing in the Indian Ocean. Of course, at that time, we were worried about nuclearization, but I think we cannot deconstruct nuclear from the Indian Ocean now. But still, we are looking for very similar things what we were looking for in 1971. So therefore, I think that was a missed opportunity. So what do I suggest as a way forward? I think we need to improve our maritime infrastructure. No single country, how big they are, of course, we know Indian Navy is the biggest in the Indian Ocean region, can be the net security provider. We need to share burdens together. We need to move from cooperation to collaboration, take action more constructively, and we need to share our burdens for common prosperity. And then we need to have our policies integrated, especially in the maritime domain. And I'm a firm believer of finding regional solutions to regional problems or regional issues. When we don't find that, the other people or other countries or other stakeholders will try to impose their solutions on us. And I believe that the way forward, operational wise, is the maritime domain awareness. That is the future. And how do we develop, operationalize maritime domain awareness? Right now, we have some trilateral agreement, but how do we incorporate that into BIMSTEC? I think BIMSTEC-wide maritime domain awareness could be the way forward for us to handle together. Now, Indian Ocean or the Bay of Bengal has many initiatives. We have SAARC, we have BIMSTEC, we have IONS, we have IORA, we have Indian Ocean Conference, we have Gaul Dialogue from Sri Lanka, we have WPNS, we have many initiatives. But are we or is anyone coordinating these initiatives or at least analyzing the outcome? So I would like to propose as a way forward that Sagar can be used as a platform to encompass all the outcomes of these initiatives. Then on the same breath, if somebody asks me about COD and BIMSTEC, I would say yes to BIMSTEC and I would say no at this moment to COD. Do we really need COD? Is COD an inclusive military alliance or is it going to be an exclusive alliance other than military? That are the questions that we need to ask. But I think BIMSTEC is a very low hanging fruit where we can really derive the benefits. Whether COD will be officialized, the unofficial Maritime Cold War that I mentioned, that is a question that we need to ask. So, ladies and gentlemen, in this situation, we need to develop confidence among our countries in the Bay of Bengal. How do we do it? Is it through a code of conduct? Is it through existing regional security architecture? Or we need to develop one? And finally, I would say it is better that we need a maritime architecture, one that we are prepared for and not the other way round. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral. I think that was very sort of forcefully put across, and this is probably the view of most of us here in this whole region. Can I invite Colonel Prida Satawon to give a Thailand perspective?
Good afternoon, Chairman, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I'm only one police officer in this panelist. I'm not from Navy, I'm not from the Security Council, but I come from Royal Thai Police. So the topic I speak today is Thailand Maritime Security Strategy, Law of the Royal Thai Police. When you say about maritime security, you usually think about the Navy, the fisher, but you may forgot the police officer. So today I have to talk about the law of Royal Thai Police in the maritime security. I would like to thank you very much for VIF and the one who may concern that invitation me to share the experience. Let's talk about the BIMSTEC member country. Thailand is the center in Indochina Peninsula, but Thailand is the right of the BIMSTEC member country. So I think Thailand is the bridge between the South Asia and ASEAN, Southeast Asia, because Thailand is the middle of the two regions have two important geographical. This is the basic information of Thailand. The population around 69 million. And we have a seashore along distance of around 3,200 square kilometer for sea area and seashore 3,010 kilometers. The seashore of Thailand is unique because we have two sides of seashore. The side in the left side is the Andaman Sea and the right side is the Gulf of Thailand. And the two sides is very important. Now, the threat to Thailand's maritime security, we divide into groups. The one group is destruction of marine environment and resource, such as illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing or IUU fishing. And destruction of marine resource and ecosystem is the first group. And the big problem of our country is IUU fishing. This is an important agenda of Royal Thai government to solve this problem, and the situation is better now. Then the second The second group is violation of the law and regulation and the right of transnational crime, such as on the screen. The trafficking in illegal seed goods is the most, and drug smuggling, illegal immigration by the sea, illegal fishing by the foreign vessel, and piracy is a few, yes. As the threat of the maritime security, our country have set the concept to be to conduct the strategy about the Thailand maritime security. We think about that national maritime security have lead to national maritime interest, and we think about the maritime security as a holistic approach because this problem is involves many stakeholders, and national maritime security involve many aspects of security such as state security, economic security, social and environment security, and human security. The new strategy, we think holistic approach and try to get the participation of sector in our country. This is a vision of our strategy. Thailand will protect, conserve, and exploit the maritime national interest with balance. This focus important is balance and sustainability following the King Lama the Nine philosophy. This is the main point of our strategy, and we work together with all concerned organizations. Strategy issue is we have also 6 in the limited of the time I show on the slide the strategy issue. For example, the first is enhance the national maritime security potential. We have to develop the marine force in every, such as a navy force, marine police force, and every organization, such as, for example. And strategy implementation, we have divided into level. The first level is the policy level. We set National Maritime Interest Policy and Administration Committee. This is led by the Prime Minister, is the head of the committee. And the operation level, Thai Maritime Enforcement Coordinating Center, or TIMEX. TIMEX is the platform for the many organizations to work together. But our problem is so many organizations involve the maritime security, and we have so many law about the ocean, the sea. So we have to platform to can the division can work together. Set by the Royal Thai Navy is the secretary of the center. And another organization we set for solve the problem of IUU fishing is the Command Center for Combating Illegal Fishing, or CCCIF. This is the main organization that solve the problem about IUU fishing in our country. Next, the key success for the maritime security is the integration of many organizations to work together, and it's also Royal Thai Police is the one mechanism, one organization in the strategy execution. The organization of the Royal Thai Police is we are under the Prime Minister, and we have the Marine Police. The Marine Police is under Central Investigation Bureau that's control in the water area along the seashore. And we have the Provincial Police Region 1 to 9. The police station along the seashore have a role to law enforcement for the offense about the sea laws or sea acts. And the Central Investigation Bureau have response for the investigation in marine security also. This is the mission of Thai Marine Police. The enhance national maritime security, enforce criminal law, use both on land and at the sea, combat piracy. Especially, we work together with the Royal Thai Navy. And in the box of the yellow box, the law we focus on law enforcement. We have so many the law about the marine security, such as the criminal code, immigration acts, navigation in the Thai water acts, and so on. This is the role of Royal Thai Police in implementation of the maritime national security, such as we conduct the crime prevention operation within 12 nautical miles from land. This is the main role of Marine Police, and prepare the Marine Police force, boat, and other equipment for the mission. Is for example. We conduct the marine surveillance, enhance the capacity of the research. That is the role of Royal Thai Police in the strategy implementation. For example, for international cooperation case, the case may not concern the BIMSTEC country, but I think it's the lesson learned for BIMSTEC member country to cooperation with each country together. For Thailand, between Thailand and Malaysia, we have the Joint Marine Security Unit exercise between Thailand and Malaysia. We have the exercise, 2 exercise per year, one time in the Thai Gulf and another time in the Andaman Sea. We work together with the Marine Police and Malaysia Maritime Enforcement Agency. And the result of the joint operation, the first is increased capacity to stop illicit goods smuggled through the sea, and strengthen partnership to prevent illegal immigration and human trafficking by the sea. And the third is very important because when we join together, when we join operation, we enhance the cross operation to build maritime security. We can establish informal, and we can direct connection between authority of both countries, because now the international cooperation, I think we have to make a cooperation in 2 levels. The second level is between the policy level, between state to state, and the second level operation level between law enforcement officer with law enforcement officer. In conclusion, I summarize that the enhancing maritime security is an important mission in protecting the nation maritime interest. And the second is to increase maritime security, we have to consider using the holistic approach, which encourages all stakeholders involved to participate and work together. Work together between government agency, private sector, or work together with the international level. And the third is strengthening international cooperation to handle maritime security threats. This can be achieved through the first is establishment of comprehensive national maritime security policy. That's now in Thailand we try to set the maritime security strategy and bring all together to work together. And the second is strengthen leadership between the states, as I mentioned before, and collaborate between domestic agency and foreign authority. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Prida. I think that was, you have a very comprehensive maritime security framework in place, and I'm sure that it is helping you. But the sense I get is that within the territorial waters where the law of the land applies, which is worldwide, even in India, the prosecution of any offender within the territorial waters is done by the police. But arrest can be made by Coast Guard or Navy and hand over to the police. But the problems that you mentioned that you're facing is the coordination amongst the agency. Let me tell you, you're not alone. All of us are having the same problem. In fact, the coastal security framework of a country has got 13 different agencies, and coordinating the actions. Of course, it has taken us some time because 26/11 happened, the Mumbai attack. After that, things have improved quite a lot, I must say that. But to have a act to establish this framework as an act of the country, that is yet to be in place. Can I invite Barrister Shah Ali Farhad from Bangladesh to make his presentation?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I feel very underqualified in the presence of one admiral, one vice admiral, a couple of captains, and one ambassador. Let me begin at the outset by saying that I'm not an expert on maritime security, but I will try my best to give you the perspective from Bangladesh. In the inaugural session, Ambassador Rawal Sibal very rightly stated that maritime security is not an issue which has been on the priority for many countries for long. In fact, even for Bangladesh, which is a coastal and a riverine country, it has not been on the priority of security issues for a long time. Bangladesh, as you know, is a delta. It has a 715-kilometer coastline. It has 12 coastal districts in 3 divisions, and a large number of the people's livelihood depend directly on fisheries, both inland as well as deep sea fishing. Additionally, 90% of the country's total foreign trade is done through maritime routes. As a result, the issue of maritime security is very important for Bangladesh. But in the very recent of years, the importance of maritime security has increased quite a bit for this country because of 2 interrelated reasons. One being that Bangladesh has been able to solve its maritime boundary disputes with its neighbors, India and Myanmar. As a result of these international arbitration verdicts, Bangladesh has obtained absolute maritime territory, additionally, of 118,813 square kilometers, 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone, and of course, the additional area of continental shelf or seabed from the coast. Now, this total area which Bangladesh has got as a result of these arbitral verdicts is 81% of the mainland of Bangladesh. It is like having a slightly smaller version of another Bangladesh to itself. Now, with these added maritime territories, the current government in Bangladesh, led by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, came up with the vision of blue economy for furthering the growth of the country. So now that we have got such a huge amount of marine territories which were previously not delineated properly, there is further prospects of trade, marine life, fisheries, energy, minerals, shipping, etc. Now that blue economy has become that much important, so has maritime security. And that is why we need to look at the threats faced by Bangladesh on its waters before looking at the responses or the strategy the country has adopted. Now, the conventional threats that Bangladesh faces in terms of maritime security is quite similar to what my colleague from Thailand has already mentioned. So we have maritime piracy and armed robbery. drug trafficking, illicit arms trafficking, human trafficking, and uncontrolled fishing. Now, maritime piracy in Bangladesh is a bit different from what you usually see in countries like, for say, Somalia, where you have these pirates who take over large shipping vessels and then hold them for ransom. The marine piracy in Bangladesh is more of small band of pirates who take over small fishing trawlers and then just loot whatever they find in the trawlers. But the damage is not small though. The incidents might not make international headlines. They are quite big in numbers. So between 2011 and 2016, it was reported by the Cox's Bazar Fishing Trawlers Association that 1,000 incidents of piracy happened between 4 years, in which around 400 fishermen got killed. Now, because these incidents are very low key, are only reported in local media, they do not make the international headlines that you would otherwise associate with maritime piracy. So that's an issue. Drug transportation is a big problem, especially drug transportation between Myanmar and Bangladesh regarding the drug yaba. So that is a big issue. Human traffic is an issue as well. So I think we all remember, and I think our honorable chair of the panel was mentioning this before the discussion started, about the 171 mainly Bangladeshi male which were found dead in a Thai jungle, who were victims of slave trade. So while not as big incidents have been reported in the meantime, they're still happening. Maritime terrorism, while not maybe a big issue at the moment, always has the potential to become a big issue, because that's the nature of terrorism. It's not an issue until there is an incident like that. And South Asia, as has been rightly mentioned by the Honorable Admiral from Sri Lanka, has its experience, fair share of experiences with maritime terrorism incidents, including the ones involving LTTE, and of course the horrendous attack at the Mumbai, where the attackers used waterways. Illegal arms trafficking used to be a big issue. Somewhat control has been brought over it by the current government in Bangladesh. One of the biggest incidents of arms trafficking which caught the international attention was the one in Chittagong in Bangladesh in 2004, where enough arms were seized, by which you could easily take over a city the size of Delhi. Enough arms were seized at that time. Of course, there are also the non-conventional threats of maritime security that Bangladesh faces, including pollution of marine environment from such sources, particularly in Bangladesh as a shipbreaking industry. So in Bangladesh, you have a big shipbreaking industry in Chittagong. You have, of course, the issue of illegal chemical wastes dumping, the very new and contemporary but equally devastating issue of electronic waste dumping, forced displacements of people. That can also be a non-conventional threat to maritime security. As you know, Bangladesh is currently hosting around 1 million forcibly displaced Rohingyas. And what implications that might have for the maritime security cannot be assessed right at the moment, but they can be dangerous, because the threats of terrorism are there, and because they are right now situated in camps which are in the coastal district, maritime security may also be threatened. Lastly, as a country which is most vulnerable, one of the most vulnerable countries to the adverse impacts of climate change, we also need to look at how climate change may impact Bangladesh's maritime security. Now, the more distinguished of the panel members have already mentioned the political issues regarding maritime security. I, being one of the more junior ones in the panel, will not go into it much deeper, but I'll just mention that regarding the issue of China, Bangladesh has actually quite successfully avoided accepting any overtures from China or even USA regarding them establishing any permanent ports or bays in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh has already, I think the more knowledgeable of such a knowledgeable audience would already know that Bangladesh has been under somewhat of an indirect pressure for many years to either give China or India or USA a naval port or a base, some form of a permanent infrastructure in the Bay of Bengal area shared in Bangladesh's territory. But Bangladesh has successfully avoided doing that for the time being, and that is my only comment on that issue. Now, as far as Bangladesh's capacity to uh, fight maritime threats, in Bangladesh, mainly for many years, the main agency which has been looking into maritime security issues has been the Bangladesh Navy. And in recent years, especially after the settlement of the maritime boundary disputes with Myanmar and India, Bangladesh has beefed up its maritime security capacities, hardware wise at least. So in October 2017, the Bangladesh Navy ordered two maritime patrol aircrafts from Germany, which support surveillance and patrol flights. In 2016, Bangladesh bought two Ming class submarines from China for its underwater capabilities. Uh, while the Navy plays a major role, Bangladesh is actually the main law enforcement agency, is the paramilitary force called the Coast Guard, the Bangladesh Coast Guard. And the Bangladesh Coast Guard has been going under a lot of transformation under the current government's plan called the Coast Guard Plan 2030, under which the Coast Guard has been strengthened in terms of its equipments as well as surveillance capabilities. So you now have a number of new hardwares have been bought over the last 5 years. The list is too big for a time as short as this. Bangladesh has also beefed up its maritime control and surveillance capabilities. It is now implementing a multi-million-dollar project with Korea for establishing 7 stations across its coastline. Uh, uh, the Department of Marine Fisheries has been separated from the Department of Fisheries, which now exclusively looks at the issue of unauthorized fishing. And Bangladesh has 2 research areas now. The Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Maritime University has been set up, which is trying to build up skilled manpower and human resources, including in the maritime sector, including in the area of maritime security. Bangladesh has also, since 2015, set up this new institution called the Oceanographic Research Institute. Uh, Most importantly, the latest update that I can give you at the moment is that Bangladesh has now taken the initiative to amend the Marine Zones Act 1974. The draft has already been approved by the cabinet, and because Bangladesh's parliament is currently not in operation till the next election, we don't know the fate of that legislation. But if it does get passed, it has a number of provisions dealing with maritime security. Lastly, I think I have dealt with the threats and the responses. Now, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, was recently addressing a meeting of the heads of the Coast Guards of Asia. Is my time up, sir? So she mentioned, and this is my final comment, she mentioned that no matter how much we do as a country in this regard, it is ultimately no country can manage maritime security issues on their own. So we must have regional and sub-regional initiatives. But the good admiral has already mentioned that we have a lot of initiatives. What we need is effective enforcement of these initiatives, or at least coming up with one effective initiative. And I think the BIMSTEC here has a crucial role to play, because at least 5 of us, as the map shown by the captain from Thailand was demonstrating, that at least 5 of us from the BIMSTEC area have a very a vertical area of sharing the waters. And we should definitely, like the BBIN, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal initiative, we can also come up with, if, say, for example, Nepal and Bhutan are not interested in maritime security issues, of course, they are quite landlocked themselves. At least the 5 of us who are sharing these common waters in the Bay of Bengal can come up with something if we can't come up with something exhaustively for the BIMSTEC itself. Those are my comments for the time being. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Barrister Farhad. I think you have only strengthened my view that issues maritime should not be left to the admirals. So you have done very well. Uh, may I invite Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, my very dear friend. He is our Maritime Ambassador.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, the BIF Director General, Dr. Arvind Gupta, for this opportunity given to me. I'm happy on a personal note to closely observe the significant strides made by BIMSTEC, whose second summit was organized when I was handling it in MEA. It's also a privilege to find myself in such a distinguished company, being chaired by Admiral Sinha. As far as the context for this particular discussion is concerned, as I see it, that the summit leaders recognize Bay of Bengal as a common security space, and the respective NSA have desired that deliberation take place on the terms of reference for security framework, including maritime. It is clearly a part of the process of making the Bay of Bengal a robust community designed to promote socio-economic prosperity, well-oiled interlocking transborder institutions, regional political and social stability, underpinned by an inclusive security framework, and a consciousness of our shared civilizational heritage. Clearly, there's much work ahead, and from that point of view, I was still in an incipient phase. Yet, as was mentioned this morning, according to historians, by the 10th century, it was being referred as the Vanga Saga in the various archaeological pieces, and the existence of a self-sustaining Bay of Bengal commercial network during the 13th, 16th century was a historical reality covering the same area as BIMSTEC and even beyond. And as an aside, I must suggest, as would recommended by another scholar, that BIMSTEC might be called the Bay of Bengal community. Now, as far as the setting is concerned, of all the sub-regions of the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal is the most stable if we were to describe the maritime order here. There is a strategic equilibrium which prevails here. Equally importantly, India's role is status quoist and not disruptive, including in economic terms. From this point of view, we need to flesh out the maritime security framework and identify the various system defense challenges to it. And in this respect, it's important that there are sufficiently strongly developed stakes by member countries in the stability of the maritime security framework. Now, as far as geopolitical trends are concerned, some of them have been referred to earlier, but it's very clear that amongst the member countries, there's an inherent desire to collaborate with each other, notwithstanding the existence of serious differences on certain issues. There is a well-established tradition of maritime cooperation amongst them. And whilst the Bay of Bengal literally experiencing a welcome development, no doubt, and economic opening up, a prospect of geopolitical tensions from the adjacent waters of South China Sea can potentially materialize, given the geostrategic significance of the Malacca Strait. So a combination of negative intra-regional, extra-regional factors need to be tempered in order to create a stable security framework, especially in the maritime domain. Now, in terms of system defense challenges, they involve both the creation of norms as well as the capacity of enforcement, with a view to maintain the current strategic equilibrium. On the normative side, India has made two major policy articulations. One is Prime Minister Modi's Saga speech, which is referred here, and there are a couple of important points there, of course, about India's own national interest in safeguarding mainland and its islands. But also, the objective is for a safe, secure, and stable region with commitment to help others during natural disasters and search and rescue, and also, of course, deepened economic and security cooperation. Also, collective cooperation for peace and security, better preparedness for emergencies through multilateral mechanisms such as IONS and bilateral maritime security operations. Also, greater regional integration on the basis of sustainable development and blue economy, but IORA is an instrument for this purpose, including for climate change. And lastly, primary responsibility for peace, stability, and prosperity of the Indian Ocean is that of the littoral states themselves. Whilst recognizing outside countries' stakes in a climate of trust and transparency, respect for international maritime rules and norms, sensitive to each other's interests, and peaceful resolution of maritime issues. Prime Minister also articulated his vision for the Indo-Pacific in the Shangri-La dialogue. And significantly, I would say that in that he outlined a completely new vision of cooperation amongst countries within the Indo-Pacific construct, relevant to the future growth of our own organization. And some of the points which actually emerge from that is that BIMSTEC and Mekong-Ganga economic corridors serve as a bridge between South and Southeast Asia. Indo-Pacific is a natural region. India stands for free, open, inclusive region. Our common security requires a common rules-based order for the region, the freedom of navigation, peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with international law. Connectivity initiatives must be based on respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, consultation, good governance, transparency, viability, and sustainability. On the enforcement capability side, there's a long way to go in the following areas. Inadequate naval and coast guard capabilities for maritime system defense roles for both traditional and non-traditional threats. Maritime domain awareness, inadequate surveillance and proactive capabilities, inadequate maritime connectivity, inadequate institutional capabilities of existing governance mechanisms, inadequate handshake protocols with other regional organizations due to the trans-regional nature of the challenges. Now, I offered a few points regarding the approach. On the normative side, as the Sagar construct posits, two types of ground rules could be thought of. Since the peace, stability, and prosperity are to be primarily maintained by the littoral states themselves, whilst recognizing the stakes of outside countries, norms can be developed such that outside powers do not develop a naval base in this littoral. Ground rules also need to be devised such for freedom of navigation over flight, especially at choke points. Except for Nepal and Bhutan, all other BIMSTEC countries are members of IORA, IONS, and HAGAM, heads of Asian Coast Guard agencies. Within BIMSTEC, I suggest, a consultative mechanism through designated focal points can be set up so that the maritime interests of Nepal and Bhutan can be taken on board in these organizations' work. These organizations are engaged in developing normative templates and enforcement capabilities so as to impart greater stability to the maritime order. This would help in raising the strategic trust levels among the various stakeholder countries and not just confined to the littoral. The intra-BIMSTEC consultative mechanism can even improve upon the normative template should a consensus be elusive in the wider IORA forum. This mechanism can serve as a useful feedback channel for better appreciation of challenges of risk management and other related maritime issues. The IORA Summit Declaration, Jakarta, March 7, 2017, describes the scope of maritime safety and security to cover accidents and incidents at sea, safety of vessels and marine environment, trans-boundary challenges such as piracy, armed robbery at sea, terrorism, trafficking in persons, people smuggling, illicit drugs, wildlife trafficking, crimes in the fisheries sector, and environmental crimes and freedom of navigation over flight, in accordance with international law and UNCLOS. Its action plan includes a long-term program, a regional surveillance network, including information maritime transportation systems. As the follow-up, a maritime safety and security working group can be established in the BIMSTEC Secretariat. Some of the IORA recommendations for sub-regional practice are for a maritime security core group for maritime crime, database for maritime safety and security at sub-regional level, homogenization of standards on port security, port control measures, patrolling and interception for an Indian Ocean MOU on port state control, SOPs for offshore upstream facilities, export terminals, effective enforcement of international ship and port facility security code. BIMSTEC would create a legal group of experts to specifically study relevant maritime law aspects, including UNCLOS, SUA, SOLAS, and so on and so forth. BIMSTEC think tanks network could carry out specific studies in this sphere purely from the organization's point of view. IONS comprises chiefs of littoral navies and other stakeholder extra-regional littoral navies. Extra-regional navies. It can provide professional inputs to IORA as the latter engages with the important task of maritime safety and security through its three committees on maritime security, HADR, and information sharing and interoperability. Interoperable procedures and capabilities can be developed and habits of cooperation formalized. And a communication channel also needs to develop between IORA and IONS. The HAGAM cooperates in 4 areas, namely search and rescue, that's coordination being coordinated by India, environmental protection, and preventing and controlling unlawful acts, and capacity building, of which Indonesia is a member of 3-nation coordination team. Now, in terms of capacity building and enforcement aspects, At the multilateral, in terms of what I've suggested for this consultative mechanism, they could be on the sidelines of the IORA and IONS meetings, a meeting amongst the BIMSTEC member states, and also apart from that, periodic interactions among relevant agencies of maritime BIMSTEC countries. Then the navies and coast guards of the maritime BIMSTEC countries could strengthen the interaction with each other for capacity building through sale transfer of hardware, training, as well as development of SOPs, including the required national legal interface for the system defense roles. This cooperation, where both the maritime as well as non-maritime member states countries are involved, would require a strategy to counter the disruptive effect of non-state actors who present a major system defense challenge. Prime Minister, in his speech at the Kathmandu summit, offered to establish a center of Bay of Bengal studies at Nalanda University for research on inter alia maritime laws. Although capacities exist, there is a need for comprehensive maritime domain awareness for the Bay of Bengal region. As with the IORA, the MDA in the Bay of Bengal region would have to be through a network of communication, information sharing arrangement amongst stakeholder countries. This is a multi-agency task requiring civil-military collaboration, including the private sector. It's particularly vital to combat piracy and armed robbery at sea, as well as IUU fishing, which is critical for the socio-economic growth of the entire region. Especially in regard to IUU, considerable organization effort is imperative, given that this is rather unregulated from maritime law point of view, and the Port State Measures Agreement is not being effectively applied. Whilst India has bilateral naval and coast guard cooperation arrangements, it has also entered into white shipping agreements with all the maritime member countries of this organization. It also has the Information Management Analysis Center near Delhi, and India offered at the IORA summit to set up an Indo-Ocean-wide MDA hub. The littoral countries also benefit from Singapore, our recap and information fusion center, etc. There are still gaps that need to be closed, and one aspect of that effort is to develop national capabilities for this purpose. This capability undoubtedly would be plugged into the larger network for sharing intelligence and security-related matters amongst member states. In addition to the development of an effective MDA, there is requirement of capacity to mount effective surveillance over various emerging situations, as well as the capability for proactive action. This would require effective coordination and real-time intelligence sharing across the spectrum of diverse law enforcement agencies involved in the coastal EEZ, and the waters outside national maritime zones. Maritime connectivity is the foundation on which the entire structure of Bay of Bengal maritime security can be raised. In addition, such connectivity infrastructure also contributes significantly to the overall regional economic, social, and cultural integration. There are significant initiatives underway at the national as well as at the regional multilateral levels. For India, the Sagarmala program will provide the necessary impetus for these endeavors. There's already a draft BIMSTEC master plan on transport connectivity prepared by the Asian Development Bank and is envisaged to be linked up with the ASEAN master plan on connectivity. All of these plans now are shaping up as the larger connectivity vision for the entire Indo-Pacific region also is witnessing significant engagement by Japan as well as the US. Meant to be financially viable without imposing any debilitating debt burden the host countries, the east-west orientation of the infrastructure connectivity has both geopolitical as well as geoeconomic significance. Last point I'll cover, 2 points in fact. The institutional capacity of the BIMSTEC as an organization need further strengthen, something we recognize the summit leaders themselves. And here, as I anyway, I think I've covered the basic point in terms of what the maritime interests of all member countries are. Secretariat capacity to handle maritime security challenges and help shape the agenda on this function for the organization as a whole. The summit leaders declared that BIMSTEC serves the bridge between South and Southeast Asia and therefore becoming constitute a wider Indo-Pacific region. It's important to develop consultative process with ASEAN, other related organizations, including UN, IMO, International Tuna Commission, and all the rest of it. The idea being to share best practice experiences as well as to have capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think you made very important points, many points, in fact, and they really can be listed as important ones. The ones which come to my mind immediately are the some ground rules which need to be made, that no outside power should have a base here. And you mentioned about the choke points, you mentioned about the port control matching, and you also talked about the sharing of white shipping data. I will go one step further, that once the confidence amongst the nations increases, then this white shipping data should actually go further to gray shipping data and the black shipping data, actually. And that is what actually will strengthen your security a great deal. So thank you very much. I have mentioned a few, and there will be many more. Can I invite our last speaker, Dr. Gurpreet Khurana? He's a serving naval officer. He is the executive director of the National Maritime Foundation.
Thank you very much, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, to begin with, I must say that they are my personal views and do not represent those of the Indian Navy or the National Maritime Foundation. The time is very short, and therefore, what I decided that I would only flag some key issues, exactly 10 of them on 10 slides, which I feel are most germane to the subject that we are discussing. First is on the slide itself, and that is the BIMSTEC logo. It is odd that the sub-regional grouping named after a sea body, the BIMSTEC logo, is devoid of blue color. Of course, we know that the etymology of BIMSTEC originated from the names of its members in 1997, but the fact remains that all its members have had inherently a land-centric perspective. And Admiral Colombage correctly called it maritime blindness. And in my view, it is high time now that this disposition should change, and there is a need for blue in BIMSTEC, at least figuratively. The recent resolution of maritime disputes among the three countries, Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar, have enhanced mutual trust, leading to enhanced geo-economic linkages. It may not have impeded connectivity, but it has certainly, the resolution has developed, as I said, trust, and of course, the appetite to harness the maritime resources, as Barrister Farhad had talked about. From the Indian perspective, it was led by the external policy reorientation by India in terms of Sagar, and there's been much which has been talked about it since the morning. Essentially, it means that all boats rise with the rising tide. Of course, and the relevance to Bay of Bengal is in terms of Modi's neighborhood first policy. With regard to Bay of Bengal, India's specific imperatives were to capitalize upon the cost effectiveness of maritime routes, and secondly, to amalgamate India's northeast states into national development. And this led to various other initiatives like Sagarmala and transnational maritime connectivity, not only for EXIM trade, but also for movement of people, tourism, and people-to-people contact, which was talked about in the morning. And a specific manifestation of this has been India-Bangladesh Protocol on land, water, transport, and trade. Only last month, the two countries signed a host of agreements, such as the extension of protocol routes and standard operating procedures for movement of cruise vessels on inland waterway routes and coastal shipping. And all this will be accompanied by the enhanced need for maritime safety and security. Now, this is on the left are the extracts of the Indian International Hydrographic Publication number 23, which gives the limits of the two seas. This is to place on record that it's not only the Bay of Bengal, but also the Andaman Sea, which is germane to our maritime cooperation. And as you see here, there are no major ISLs in this area except the one which comes right from south of Sri Lanka, and it crosses into the area of the Bay of Bengal and Andaman Sea for a brief period before it turns southwards into the Andaman Sea. So the point that I'm trying to make here is because there are no major sea lines here and choke points in this area, there is actually no piracy, which is surprising to many of us because we have been talking about piracy, but that is not piracy. That is armed robbery at sea because it happens as national jurisdiction, wherein the countries themselves are responsible for their security. And so it is not piracy. But that does not mean piracy men will not come here, because the international trade is increasing. There'll be tankers going from south of Sri Lanka to Chokfu very frequently from now onwards, and there you will see the rise of shipping, and therefore piracy may arise. The transnational maritime crimes are, of course, drug trafficking and arms trafficking. They're quite rampant, and they have been there for a long time. They have been feeding into the militant movements in India's northeast. And I was glad to hear from Barrister Farhad that in Chittagong in 2004, I think you got a huge deal of arms. But that doesn't mean we should be complacent about it. What about submarine cables? In the morning, somebody said, "Wow, yes, we can share data through submarine cables." But then, who is responsible for its security? What if the terrorists do something funny there? I thought I will check from the Indian government. I tried to check who is the Indian Navy. Can it answer this question? Can somebody in the government answer this question? I have not got my answers. Who is responsible for maritime security of the submarine cables? A major issue in the Bay of Bengal is how to sustain the fast depleting fish stocks and the huge dead zone that it has, and in accordance with the principles of blue economy. Could the Bay of Bengal littorals coordinate the domestic laws with regard to regulation of fishing activity? The prevention of illegal fishing and poaching of the Andaman Nicobar was the main task of the new fast-track crafts commission in Port Blair, soon after the integrated Andaman Nicobar Command came into being in 2001. And I commissioned one of them as the first CEO in 2002. And the same year, we began the coordinated patrols with Indonesian Navy. And after 3 years in 2005, with the Thai Navy. The aim was to have the Indian Navy in constant touch with their counterparts in Indonesia and Thailand, so that the fishermen who were poaching in the Andaman Nicobar waters could be handed over to them, so that we don't go into the elaborate legal processes, including confiscation of their boats. Later in 2013, we forged an agreement, a corporate agreement with Myanmar, and recently this year in 2018 with Bangladesh. So although this is much, of course, for illegal fishing, but a lot more can be done using these coordinated mechanisms, and of course involving information sharing and intelligence sharing on an as required basis. The next issue number 5, is maritime search and rescue. Now, this is this search and rescue, providing assistance to distressed people at sea, is an international obligation of states and their maritime forces, and it is codified in international law. And this has to be recognized by BIMSTEC countries. Irregular migrants, they are not illegal migrants. Please, for God's sake, do not call it illegal migrants, because as migrants, they have a legal right to seek refugee status. Whether they get asylum or not is a different issue. So when they are at sea, they are not illegal migrants, they are irregular migrants. And that's more of a reason that you need to have laws and your actions to protect them at sea. Now, there's a problem here. And the problem is that the Search and Rescue Convention of 1979, only India and Bangladesh have ratified it. The other countries have not. Now, this is not uncommon in BIMSTEC region. It is the same thing in the ARF, in the ASEAN. Many of those countries have not ratified the SAR convention as well. And that is why when we went into the CSCAP study group for search and rescue, which was constituted after the MH370 went down, I represented India with the Malaysian counterpart as co-chairs in the study group. We realized that this is a problem. Countries are sensitive about their sovereignty. The Search and Rescue Convention, although it's a benign convention, it will allow the navies of major powers to come into the territorial waters, and that therefore they do not ratify it. How can we get over that? And we decided the best way to get over this problem is to sign MOUs with neighboring countries, and the same is applicable to BIMSTEC. And that is the reason why, when you see on the left-hand side, there are provincial search and rescue region areas. There are not definite, because the countries have not ratified the SAR Convention. Some MOUs have already been signed, such as the Indian Coast Guard has signed with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. One with Myanmar is being discussed, but there is no progress on the MOU with Thailand, possibly due to the ongoing reorganization of the Thai Coast Guard. Point number 6, maritime disasters. This is, of course, an obvious thing. The entire northeastern Indian Ocean is well known to be prone to natural disasters. The 2004 tsunami clearly indicated and that the problem is not only tropical cyclones. And the reason is, which is less known in our country, in India itself, there are many people who do not know that India has an active volcano on Barrel Island, it's the Andaman Nicobar. The reason is the seismic fault line stretches across the entire subterranean ridge along the Andaman Nicobar group. The Indian Navy has instituted an internal mechanism. For instance, now all Indian warships now carry palletized HADR stores. However, a coordinated approach among the coastal countries of BIMSTEC is necessary. Point number 7, capability enhancement. 4 of the 5 largest vessels in the Sri Lankan Navy are Indian built. Of course, for India, these hardware transfers are likely to grow after Mauritius commissioned the Barracuda, which is the first warship that India built specifically designed for a foreign buyer. But the issue is that India's core strength does not lie in hardware, it lies in software. It lies not in hardware capacity, but capability. And capability means training, doctrines, hydrographic assistance, maritime domain awareness, and so on. The Indian Navy coordinates a fairly well-developed National Command Control and Communication Intelligence Network, NC3I net, instituted after the Mumbai terror attacks, with a nerve center called Integrated Management and Analysis Center called or IMAC at Gurugram near Delhi. In a couple of years, the IMAC will house the IOR Information Fusion Center with foreign international liaison officers or ILOs similar to the Singapore's facility IFC. Another positive development is the White Shipping Agreement. As you see on the slide, of the 36 countries that the government of India has approved, India is doing quite well with white shipping sharing agreements with these BIMSTEC countries. Admiral Colombi and talked about and a combined maritime security strategy for BIMSTEC. I think that's a wonderful idea. But before we go there, we need to cross an hurdle. We need to have first a doctrine first, so that we can be on the same platform as to the usage of terms and concepts. Point number 8, military issues. The submarine operating countries in our region are increasing. Bangladesh is acquiring submarines and Thailand will do so soon. India and Indonesia are adding new submarines. This leads to some critical imperatives, notably the deconfliction of unintended naval encounters, water space management, and submarine safety. With regard to submarine rescue, the Indian Navy has recently acquired an effective capability and is willing to share it with other submarine operating navies which do not have this capability. Ambassador Farah talked about the fact that Bangladesh has averted the prospect of having Chinese bases in Bangladesh. I think they were seeking in Chittagong, but that should not make us complacent. These facilities, these submarines in Thailand and Bangladesh will give the Chinese Navy virtually a base. With the Bangladesh and Thai Navy operating same submarines with the same spare parts, ordnance, and so on. So I would request Ambassador Farah to carry this thought back home. Let me now, point number 9, let me broaden the scope by contextualizing BIMSTEC with the pan-IOR maritime safety and security structures. There is an exigent need to develop the BIMSTEC maritime safety and security agenda to contribute to the IORA, whose MSS structure itself is in a very nascent stage. It was with the efforts of India in 2011, in which Dr. Arvind Gupta was talking in lunch, that was the role that he played in it. And it was in 2014 that when Australia was the chair, this thing came into being. It was only in September that we had the first initial conference in Colombo of the Maritime Safety and Security Working Group of IORA, where we laid down the terms of reference, and I represented on behalf of the MEA. And so the fact that it is at a nascent phase is a good time for BIMSTEC agenda to plug into this. And the fact is that we keep talking in IORA that we should have an inclusive approach. And we always have in mind that how best to please the extra regional stakeholders and not to annoy them and tell them that, listen, our approach is very inclusive. And of course, we do need them as well. It's not that we don't need them. But inclusive doesn't mean that you only look outside. You look inside as well. There are sub-regional arrangements which need to plug into the IORA, and that's what I'm trying to say. And here, it's a great good news that Maldives has been included in the IORA, but Myanmar has not. And there is a strong case for Myanmar to be included in the IORA. Of course, there are views on it that because possibly Myanmar government is not doing enough for the Rohingyas, so then it's not a good idea. But I think it's the other way around. For having some kind of a pressure on the Myanmar government, which is already under pressure because of various internal issues, Myanmar needs to be a part of the system. It was precisely this reason why ASEAN included Myanmar within ASEAN.
You may be eating into tea time.
Sure. I'll just my last slide after this. So this is where we are. So Myanmar is important to be included in the IORA, and then BIMSTEC could always benefit from whatever is going on in IONS and Milan. And Ramanpuri was telling me in the morning, sir, that the first time Milan met in 1995, it was the Bay of Bengal idea which was in the mind, and so Milan could be capitalized upon to have a functional interface with the political BIMSTEC. And my last slide here is the geopolitics. Of course, there's nothing much to talk about, except Mr. Kanwal Sibal said very rightly in the morning that the regional countries would need to balance their economic needs with the security of its neighbors, which affects on their own security. But that is not all. The Bay of Bengal could be the next major power contestation after the South China Sea. Only 4 days ago, I attended the 10th South China Sea Conference in Vietnam, and the conference clearly brought out that the issue is no longer between China and ASEAN, and it involves the entire Indo-Pacific region and its stakeholders, because China, through its historical claims, is challenging the established maritime norms and legal order based on UNCLOS. Even though China does not have maritime claims in the Bay of Bengal, given its increasing geopolitical presence in the Indian Ocean region, any insecurity or discord in Bay of Bengal will involve China directly, leading to geopolitical contestation. In this direction, the resolution of maritime disputes in our region is a positive step, but much more needs to be done. And this includes accommodating and including Bhutan and Nepal, giving them access to the sea as clearly provided for by UNCLOS. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gurpreet. I think that was extremely descriptive and very, very well brought out. What I'll do is that before I make my 2 lines to comment, House is open if there are any questions. If you're willing to compromise on some tea time, please go ahead. Yeah.
At Bangladesh, you had mentioned that the Prime Minister has emphasized on the requirement of cooperation between the Coast Guard, as what was brought by the Admiral Columbage, that there's a requirement to cooperate in the field of maritime field. You'll agree that there is a setup already existing in the form of Dosti, which is bringing all this paraphernalia of maritime security in form of trilateral. Was there a similar thing being proposed in the Hagam 14, which was held in October? Is there any insight on this, or is there a thought process in the headquarters of BIMSTEC to cooperate the Coast Guards for the benign role of maritime security?
I wasn't.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I wasn't present in that program. I looked at the proceedings of the program, but
I could not see any kind of resolution as such coming from that program which suggests something like that. But the Prime Minister was quite adamant on actually forming up something of that nature. But it was much more of a political speech rather than a formulation of a policy which could be taken forward. But I'm not sure whether I think someone from the Bangladesh government would be better able to answer that as to whether they have something like that in mind. I think that's a very good idea actually, because the Coast Guards are already they're already cooperating among themselves.
Dinakar, you had some question? No. Yeah, please. Can you just identify yourself?
The sea strip between Sri Lanka and Tamil Nadu is nowadays really exposed for drug trafficking and human smuggling. So if BIMSTEC can sort of prioritize the regional importance and act on that, be just a suggestion of mine, because we have seen a huge increase in nowadays, and on the other hand, this things like bottom trawling, which destroy the seabed and marine life. It's happening in the northern part of Sri Lanka, in between Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka. So just a suggestion, as I told you, if we can prioritize as the BIMSTEC as a whole, if we can prioritize and do something for that.
You see the delimitation of the sorry, I'll just make a input here. Delimitation of the boundary lines have already been done. Now it is a question of having a mechanism for patrolling and law enforcing. So that's a larger point of law enforcement, both one on policy level and one is actually having the mechanism how to enforce it. So I think that is the takeaway which I'll possibly cover. Right now, we need to do something.
Nothing much to add, but this is the agony of transnational crimes indicates. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka has become a conduit for drugs. It's not really for the use of Sri Lankans, but we act as a conduit for drugs coming from the Makran coast, and some of it actually come across the Tamil Nadu coast because they are so close proximity. So this is kind of irony of proximity. But that is actually impact on the whole Bay of Bengal region. Similarly, if you take Myanmar, Thailand, that Bangladesh region, there are certain issues taking place. And I think very fortunately, Indian East Coast is devoid of any of these activities. But this proximity between the land is there.
I think the framework that we talked about, we said that narcotics, drug trafficking, etc., which the director had also mentioned. Ambassador, you had a question.
Mr. Chairman, just to explain what Captain Kurana raised, whether there is a legal regime to govern the submarine cables. In fact, recently we had the Indian Ocean Conference in Colombo. The former Prime Minister, Mr. Wickramasinghe, suggested Sri Lanka to establish International Center for Submarine Cable Network. So I just thought that I will, those who have not been in Colombo, there is a proposal that we made to host an international center to operationalize and then monitor submarine cables, because most of the submarine cables go through Sri Lankan territorial waters.
Last question, Captain Bison.
Thank you, sir. So if you permit me latitude, I have two questions. My first question is to Admiral Columbus. Sir, the chair spoke about relaxation in cabotage laws, and I've got some figures of CLSA, sir. The gain for Indian ports has been from 1,589 containers in June to 47,000 containers in September. Between August and September, there's been an increase of 70%. Sir. My question is, sir, what are your thoughts on it, sir? And secondly, could Colombo's loss become Trincomalee gain, sir? What is your thoughts on possibility of Trincomalee emerging as a hub for transportation in the BIMSTEC region, sir? So, second question, if you permit, sir, is partly to be answered by Colonel Prida, and maybe anybody in the panel can take this answer. I refer to the last week's news item of Prime Minister of Thailand ordering the Thailand National Security Council to undertake a feasibility study on the Thailand Kra canals. And even though the idea has been, in vogue for more than 300 years, since 1677, if I'm correct, but it is increasingly, becoming a reality in next 15, 20 years.
Okay, I'll interrupt here. This question you can speak to him bilaterally during tea.
Okay, so Samad, the second part of the question is that this is going to impact every single country in the BIMSTEC region. So,
understood. That you
this,
can have a chat.
So very quickly, few parts in your question. The relaxation of cabotage law, actually, Admiral Shekhar Singh and we were discussing it during the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm happy some relaxation has made, and it has created a positive impact on the enhancement of shipping. Right now, what happens is the trade between Bangladesh and Sri Lanka is enhancing, but not so much with the east coast of India. So we need to really recreate, and I think we need to take Myanmar and Thailand on board as well to create a regional maritime hub for internal trade. We are always talking about external trade, forgetting, as Captain Kurana mentioned, inclusivity means among us as well. So that is one thing. And yes, again in the same conference, we proposed Trincomalee as the hub port for Bay of Bengal. But I think this is the deepest, largest, most safest port in the whole of Bay of Bengal, unused. I mean, hardly used. So that can be a port for a Bay of Bengal. And we really need to enhance this linkage between our countries. I mean, we heard only 5% of our economies are integrated. So that's nothing. So we need really, and I'm very happy that a lot of things are really moving in the right direction. So we need the more trade. Right now, the East Coast and East Coast of India and Sri Lanka trade is limited to the transshipment containers going via Colombo and a small ship carrying cement from Karikal to north. That's nothing. So we need to enhance. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Just a small point in cabotage law. Sorry. Can you just? I think we'll sum it up now because we are going past the time. Sorry about that. As far as the coastal shipping and cabotage law, you said, though the number of the pelletized containers has increased, but the profit and the revenue generation of these ports have not gone up accordingly. That is because what is happening is that the reciprocal, the exemptions in Colombo port or let's say Bangladesh ports, they have not been given to the Indian ships. And here there is a complete exempt from GST and all other, that's why the volume is not generating sufficient. So that talk is going on right now. Number one. Secondly, I just wanted to add in Trincomalee, it is the deepest natural harbor. There's nothing unnatural. You can actually negotiate the banks and you can reach right up to there. You will not find a single construction on the banks. Right. So what I'll do is I will just, as my predecessor had mentioned, that what are the takeaways. So I've got 5, 6, there'll be many more. But what is visible is that a BIMSTEC MDA, the Maritime Domain Awareness, we must get hooked on initially by, the white shipping and subsequently the grey shipping and the black hull, which Gurpreet Khurana mentioned about the submarines. Coordinating the functions of large number of agencies in ensuring security. I think this is the trouble with all countries, and our own internal country regulations need to be at the policy level. They require a little attention of the, possibly in India it will be Home Ministry. So there are two kinds of problems which I see that generally has been voiced in BIMSTEC. One is at policy level where the protocols of the handshake have to be established amongst the country. So that is a very urgent necessity of achieving all this, because then similar laws will apply and then you will be able to arrest somebody in somebody else's water and hand over to him and it still be case be registered. I'm just saying the ultimate case. And second one will be at the level of the enforcement. Once you make the laws, then you can have a combined force do the enforcement of law, because everybody's capacity is not same. India will have to play a very major role because you are closer to Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan ship, you don't expect him to come and be present all the time of Bangladesh or Myanmar. So it is only India who can be present, omnipresent, and use the bilateral relations with the countries in the neighborhood to enforce this law. Then one very good point which Ambassador Yugandhar mentioned was the environment. In this whole hurry-burry, we should not even environment laws enforcement must form part of this policy. Good governance, needless to say, because of these maritime crimes, you call it piracy or whatever you want to call it, you call it theft. Outside forces do not make bases in Bay of Bengal. I think that was a very, very good suggestion. Connectivity, people to people, yes. What I was suggesting in the beginning, that having connectivity by road is important, but if you start this coastal shipping, it is faster. And that is how in the old times, people were so close that everything traveled. The culture traveled right up to Indonesia is not because there was any road connectivity. It is mainly because of maritime connectivity, and that is what the cultural heritage. Why are we digging back into it? It is just that, so that we have this commonality which must be put to use, and the fastest is the clearing of the cabotage law and getting this coastal shipping. That's why I mentioned right in the beginning, and we have been trying very hard for last 3 years. Let's see, we have reached somewhere, but still. Safety of submarine cables, very good point you made. I don't know who's responsible. And you mentioned about corporate. No, we have bilateral with everybody, but this should be actually, this is what is required. It has to be put as one big envelope. Now we have bilateral with everybody. So why can't it be made on a multilateral level? So these are the points which I thought will take home and pass it to the VIF for very thoughtful. So all that remains for me to please give a round of applause to our. I know it was exhaustive. You have lost tea time, but you don't discuss maritime very often. Thank you.
I now thank Session 2 panel for their highly engaging and discerning elaboration of maritime security issues and recommendations for the way forward. We will now break for tea, which will be served at the portico on ground floor. The third and last session of the day will commence at 4 p.m. Thank you so much.
Come, sir, come.